Basically, this looks at the concept of understanding how you feel, understanding your options, delaying gratification to get a bigger prize. This would be an ultimate end of decision making. Can I decide that I'm going to be able to put off immediate gratification for something that could be a bigger prize at the end of the day? And this has to do with these big ideas of self-control, impulse control, willpower, and all of these things. You begin to see how kids, depending on their age, between 3 and 4, can begin to develop this, but how 3-year-olds really are just so bad at this, whereas by the time you hit 4, you're pretty good at this. When they do the follow-up of these individuals over time, they find that these guys are actually better off. I invite you to read the book so that you can actually get a better sense of this, but right now we'll look at the video.
Okay, sit in that chair. Alright, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? Alright. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
Alright, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay.
This is the little one.
Alright, so I'm going to leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
Okay, when they did this longitudinal follow-up with these people, you can find about a third of these guys, like, immediately they'll eat the marshmallow. A third of them try really hard, but they can't do it, right? And then there's this really special third of people who can actually put it off, right? And so what did they find out about them? I invite you to do the research and show yourself, okay? Emotions in the brain, some highly recommended resources. Antonio Damasio is actually really one of these leading experts in this area on emotions in the brain, if you're interested in this angle of emotional studies. So then after you've reviewed some of the different studies that are out there, I invite you to actually have this big reflection, which is still in debate. You know, what is more important, emotional intelligence or general IQ? You know, being able to be smart. Well, how important is it to be smart in a social context versus in academic contexts? And what does the world really need right now? That's for you guys to debate. Okay, so last 2 points. Why is emotional intelligence so different from multiple intelligences? When Howard Gardner threw out there the inklings of this idea, this is 30-something years ago, right? He did not include emotional intelligences because he had certain parameters. Basically, this is something that is certain networks in your brain that can be stimulated and improved upon. And here's where we differ. Emotional intelligence is all over the place in the brain. Well, you might say there's certain networks that are related to decision-making, interpretation of emotions. There's others that are involved in generation of emotions. And so you basically can't nail down where emotions are in the brain. So hopefully you guys are really clear about the myth of having, this right emotional brain versus this left logical brain. That is not true. That is just not true. So we have this highly intricate set of neural networks in the brain that are related to emotions, which makes it really hard to nail it down and to say, okay, this has evolved, right? So we have difficulty in measuring it, and we have difficulty in understanding how it's linked to all these other things. While Gardner, and you can look on his own webpage, he talks about this, about his reaction to emotional intelligence, thinks it's a great addition, nice thing. Same thing with, moral intelligence. He thinks those things are really nice ideas, but since they don't meet his original criteria, he's stuck to these 7 ideas with adding on the naturalistic concept as an 8th intelligence, back in 2000. So it's not something that he's added to his list of things. He doesn't say it's wrong. He actually, appreciates emotional intelligence, but it's not part of his, the theory of multiple intelligences. Is there a difference now, finally, last point, between emotional intelligence and social cognition? Social cognition is your ability, unconsciously or consciously, to transmit and interpret in feelings of others. We use this a lot in education because it's very important for teachers to understand how their emotional state can really be contagious and infect the whole classroom, right? So we know that how an individual feels can trigger the change in emotions in the entire group. So this is different. If you had a highly working emotional intelligence system, you would understand that you have to, at one level, be able to manage the emotions of others, right? So this would be where social cognition comes into play. So you might say that social cognition is a kind of a sub-area of emotional intelligence. Okay, so if we look at it this way, you have in social cognition, you have things that individuals do, and then you have individual factors of those individuals that affect that social environment, right? And this environment is changed by how people act outwardly, their behavior, and how people feel based on their past experiences. So that changes your dynamics. But what's very interesting now is that we have studies coming out of Japan that actually measure how how there's a change in actually neurotransmitters that are evident in saliva samples, for example, to show how different social environments created by the teacher influence how the student actually feels. So we understand that this is a big, long cycle, that in social cognition you have where an individual is listening to information, they might question the information at hand, they'll share something about what's happened, there's some support for the information as far as additional vocabulary, clarification of terms, the teacher might challenge them on what do they really know about these things. There can be this dissonance, there's this moment of, well, I'm not sure, I'm confused, and so that you have this cognitive dissonance, then you can give some feedback to the person so they can continue to learn, and they continue to have these types of experiences that change, they transform the individual. But this social cognition cycle also is very dynamic, so it can change in any minute. So if the conversation starts out good and light and the teacher doesn't have good classroom management skills, for example, and one person just goes off in some direction, they can really suffocate a good learning cycle of the others, right? Similarly, you can have a really bright and perky and wonderful stimulating student who is so empathetic to others that he or she might realize, I'm kind of ahead of the curve on this, maybe I'll help, and they throw their hat in the ring with doubts themselves. Whereas they might be pretty clear, they are sensitive enough to how the others are moving along that they want the group to move together, and so they don't show off what they know. They try very hard to bring the whole group along together. So you can have a lot of very interesting dynamics in a classroom, most of which are things that are led by individual teachers. Mainly that's because we have teacher-centered classrooms. But if we had better management styles in our classroom, you'd have a lot more equity as far as the input from all the different individuals in the room. Okay, as we know that the brain judges faces and voices almost unconsciously and immediately when we meet people. And so first impressions are lasting, right? So what you first think about an individual can really shape the way you choose to interact with them, because you think, oh gosh, the first time I met him was so scary. You might, back away from further interaction. What you have to realize, though, is that you should be open, because we know that these things can change over time. People evolve, and people can actually learn to modify their own behavior, and you can find them not so scary the next time, right? So long as we can keep our threat level or perception of threat lower, then we can be open to new experiences in our contact with other individuals. Finally, stress is both positive and negative. You need stress to stay alert. If you're not alert, you're not paying attention. But on the other extreme of things, you are too stressed to pay attention. And we know that at both extremes, when you're totally asleep and when you're highly anxious, there's no learning happening, right? So we're looking for this nice fine balance here. It's called eustress, where you're actually alert, but you're not freaked out, okay? And that would be the best level of attention that we look for in a classroom. Obviously, there's several other emotions that come into play. We want to not necessarily be totally happy. Being inquisitive can actually be stressful in and of itself, and can actually being curious can be another, very interesting on the scale of emotions. There's intrigue, but you're not happy, you're not sad, you're not aggressive, but you're somewhere else in there. In the scale of things, it's this very fine balance, and each individual actually has to take the time to reflect. Where is my balance? What am I feeling? And how well can I focus? When a lot of people go into learning situations or contact with others, sometimes they're so obsessed with one particular aspect of their life that they're missing out on all the other things that are happening. And so they obsess with one thing, and they're missing the rest of the other things. And unfortunately, it's easier to obsess over negative emotions than it is over positive emotions. And so hopefully we can find that balance in all of our lives there. Finally, I want to throw in this last very curiosity. There is actually a disease. It's called Alexisemia, which has to do with the inability to name emotions. It's an individual who can talk, but the one thing they can't do is label their own emotions. I mentioned this just to go full circle back to part 1, when we talked about how do you help children develop emotional intelligence. Well, one of the first things you have to do is help them label those emotions that they're feeling, right? Be able to name it. And one of the biggest problems with these poor individuals is that they are unable to identify with words. It means they feel it, right? They have the emotional experience. The consequences of this, if you can't identify your emotions, then you're going to have emotional types of anxiety. You're not able to make certain types of decisions, and so you're basically stuck, right? One of the studies that was done on this is by Taylor. You can find it in the references. Hopefully some of you will follow up on this particular theme. Finally, and on a positive note, to help those small kids, again, develop emotional intelligence, we talked about helping kids, identify what do they feel, how are they good, what do they feel good about themselves, when are those good emotions related to specific characteristics of themselves, right? So that they can actually label that, feel good sensation with how what it is that they are doing, okay? So we're helping them learn to articulate their emotions by giving them words. When they're a bit older, we can try to seek out this level of empathy. So once they've begun to identify this personal level of understanding of their emotions, now we actually challenge them to see those emotions in other people. Okay, with that then, we're going to close, and I invite you again to look into some of these other references and to think about some of the themes that we've talked about and try to study them in a bit more depth in order to satisfy your own personal curiosity about these different areas. And hopefully this information is useful to each of us on an individual scale and actually bettering the way that we manage the emotions in our lives. Thank you very much.